This is my first Zoom class. I have not done one of these before. It's kind of weird not seeing everyone's faces out there. Anyway, welcome to the class. And this is navigating Sunriver Owners Design Committee, as some of you may have already attempted or are considering for the future. The purpose of the class is to give you the guidelines basically that'll help you submit applications and get them approved easier, give you hints on what to do and help you out through the process so you'll learn and understand exactly the reasons for the process, as well as how to go through the process so you can get that new project of yours approved as quickly as possible. Panel consists of Kurt Wolf, the chairman of the committee, Mark Fire, who is the vice chair, and Marty Siemens, who is representing SROA administrative perspective on this. The class will take place with a presentation by the panel initially. When they're through, they will then open it up for questions, which you'll need to raise your hand or indicate that you want to ask a question, and then Marty or someone on the panel will unmute you and you'll be able to ask the question. That'll come after their presentation, however. There were some questions that were initially sent to us and the panel has been given those questions, so they should try to answer those during their presentation, I would imagine. That's about all I have to say. I'm going to turn it over to them and I hope you really enjoy the class. Kurt, I guess you're up, or whoever's going to lead off here.
Already will.
Thank you, Scott.
Yep.
Okay, so for those of you who can see me, I'm Marty. I am the design review planner as it is now. It used to be the code enforcement officer. We do have a new member. Ken Katsuda is our new compliance technician. He's just sitting in today for now because today's his first day. But just a quick review or overview of what I'm going to be covering on my portion, and then Kurt and Mark will follow. One is the purpose of the design review. Then I'll give a brief overview of the review process. And that's basically it for my portion. Of course, there's more to it than that, but so what is the purpose of the design review here in Sunriver? The main purpose is to maintain the community appearance and the property values of the Sunriver as a whole, of your properties. And as you all know, Sunriver is a unique place with our environment we have here, and we try and maintain that, and we try and maintain a certain set of standards. And the design review is a part of that, as well as the design committee. That's a big responsibility for them, and they take it very seriously. So the first thing I'll cover is, well, in conjunction with the community appearance and property values, we have, just so everybody knows, that the design committee is set forth from the founders of Sunriver through the consolidated plan. Design committee is responsible for the approval of plans and specifications for the development of all areas subject to the consolidated plan, and the enforcement of rules and regulations governing the use and maintenance of such areas and the improvements associated. Obviously, the design committee has rules and regulations. It's mine and Ken's and Jackie's job to kind of maintain those standards and enforce the standards for the design committee. That being said, the community development department, our purpose is to work with the design committee to ensure the strict landscape and architectural standards, make sure those are met and compatible with the other properties in Sunriver, and working in harmony with the Sunriver surroundings. We are located in the Sunriver Owners Administration Building, which is in the same building as the police department and right next to the fire department on Abbott Drive. We have three staff members now. We had two, and now we have three. It's Jackie Bew is the office manager. Ken is the compliance technician. And then, as I said before, I'm the design review planner / code enforcement officer. So if anybody, and all of our information is on our website, emails, phone number, you contact us if you have any questions about community development or any of this process. So what work requires a design review, and what projects require a design review? So the purpose of this presentation, we're referring to a full committee review, meaning there's certain projects that go on a design committee meeting agenda, require the full committee review, and then there are other projects that are administrative, and those are typically smaller projects that take less time and are typically reviewed by only one committee member or possibly two, depending on the scope of work. For full committee review projects, they include but are not limited to, and I'll get to that in a second, new homes, enclosed additions or garages, hot tubs if you're adding a hot tub to your property or you're relocating one, dog runs if you want to build a little small area for your dogs so you can let them out and they're not running all over Sunriver. Service yards, which is similar to a dog run, but that's typically air conditioners, garbage enclosures, storage, that kind of thing. Upper level decks is another one, and if you're expanding an upper level deck or changing the configuration of it, or adding on to it. And then another one is demolition projects not associated with other projects. Now, what that one is not as common as a lot of the other projects. It's say you are, for some reason, it hasn't happened yet since I've been here, but some reason you want to demolish your house and start over, but you're not starting over for a time period, say 6 months to a year. So you're just going to demolish it and leave it an empty lot. That's just an example. That would require full committee review. Another example is, I'm sure you've all seen the north pool is being renovated. They had to go through full committee review to tear a lot of the old structures and that out because they weren't going to actually start work on the new structures for approximately 6 or 8 months after that. So they had to do that. Really, it's the projects that need to go full committee review are projects that would require a neighbor notification because of the size and scope of the exterior change. And that's one thing I guess I haven't covered yet is the design committee mostly reviews projects that are exterior in nature of your property. There are a couple areas, and I'm sure Mark or Kurt will get into this later, but I'll just touch on it. There are a couple areas where they do review an interior remodel or change. But that's only if it's adding a sleeping area, which would mean you would need to add a parking zone in your driveway for that extra sleeping area. Other than that, it's pretty much all exterior. Let's see, time frame. So this is always a big question with homeowners is how long does it take to go through this process? So from submittal deadline day to meeting day is approximately 14 to 15 days. This gives us time as staff to notify neighbors, to get plans prepared, packets prepared for the design committee to review. And then the meeting day comes and that's when you'll get reviewed and a decision. If you're approved with conditions on the meeting day, it then is up to the applicant to submit revised plans addressing any of those conditions that the design committee has put on that project for administrative review. And now I say administrative review, that's typically how it goes, but there are some items that Mark or Kurt will probably cover in their presentation that they can put in the motion in their decision that require a full committee review, typically on a new home, say colors, materials, boards, things like that. They may want to see it as a full committee and not administratively. So that doesn't necessarily mean it has to be another meeting. It could be a full committee administrative review, but there's a couple different ways to accomplish those revised plans and conditions. If you have a approval with conditions, once you get that final decision, you have a 10-day waiting period that is lined out in the rules and the rules and procedures of the manual. That 10-day waiting period is there for a couple reasons. The main reason is if there are any neighbors that want to appeal the decision, they don't agree with the committee's decision on approving or denying your project, they have that 10-day window to submit their appeal. And then going back to the administrative reviews for your conditions of approval on the revised plans, that process takes approximately 5 to 7 business days from the time we get the plans and the application submitted to the design committee. They review it, make their decision, and send it back to us. And then you get a notification of that, typically by email, of the decision. So once all this is done, you've met all your conditions of approval, that 10-day waiting period has gone by, and we have all the fees associated with the project, including the construction deposit and the permit fee. Then we can issue the permit to start the work. It's very important to note that the applicant needs to, it is the applicant's responsibility to contact the community development department prior to starting any work for us to issue the permit. And we've had a lot this past year with the pandemic and everything, just kind of threw people off, but we've had a lot of people just go ahead and do their projects or start their projects before we issue a permit. And so we try and let people know before they start, typically a day or two before you're going to start work, call us or email us, have us issue the permit. We can issue the permit through email or leave it in the foyer in the drop box for pickup. The applicant or their representative, say the contractor or somebody of that nature, can pick up the permit for you and post it at the property on the front of the house, so people will see that there's a project going on there. If for some reason your project is deferred or denied, you can resubmit the same project at the next available submittal deadline for the next available meeting. Since the deadline for the next meeting is approximately 14 to 15 days, it's already, how is the best way to say this? So the day that your project is reviewed at a meeting, the day prior to that is typically the submittal deadline day. So you've already missed that submittal deadline for the very next meeting. So you're actually 2 meetings out to be able to submit anything from if you had a denial or a deferral. It's designed that way. It's set up that way. So you approximately a month before you can resubmit your project. One thing to note on that is if you submit a project and it is deferred 3 times, it is then denied after 3 deferrals. If it's denied, there's really no stipulation as far as it being denied further. You can receive a denial, a couple times before it gets approved. A deferral, though, if the same project is deferred 3 times, it will be denied. There is a part of that part of the manual also speaks to, is it the deferral or denial, where it says it has to be substantially different? I forget.
Denial.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So if it is denied, what the rule says is submit the project. It has to be substantially different project the next time you submit. Now there's no set criteria on what is substantial. That's really up to the design committee to determine. I can take a look at it, prior to submitting, and give some feedback on whether it's substantial enough, because I do work with the committee fairly closely, and I know what they're looking for. But ultimately, it's the design committee's decision to determine that. Let's see. I'm running over. So, and just in closing, I'll just kind of a brief, summary of kind of how it works. So, when you first submit, I'm always available to take a look at your plans for your project prior to submitting it, a few days prior, and I can give you feedback on if you're missing important information, or if everything looks fine, or what have you. So that's you've got the application and the plans. There's 4 sets of plans required, plus the review fee. That's really about it. I don't know, did I miss anything, Mark or Kurt, that you can think of?
I don't think so. We'll probably cover it if you did.
Okay, I'll hit one last thing. So I missed the re-review and appeal, and I don't know if you're going to cover that, but I'll just touch on it. So if your project is, if there's any portion of the decision on your project that the committee made that you don't agree with, you do have the right to a re-review and then an appeal. A re-review is essentially the first appeal. You can, it needs to be in writing to staff that you're requesting a re-review, and then we put it on the next available meeting for the committee to review. And then after that, if you still are not happy with the decision or don't agree with it, you have an appeal process that you can go through. That is a board member and 2 other members on the appeal council. And that's I won't go into the whole specifics of that, because we don't have too many of those. Typically we can resolve it, the committee can resolve it before then. And then once your project is complete, it's the applicant's responsibility to contact the community development office for a final inspection. We come out and do a final inspection, make sure everything's to the approved plans. And then if there's anything that was changed that you didn't notify us of, you may have to come back to the design committee with an administrative for as built, or you'd be required to change it one way or the other. Once we do the final inspection, everything is approved and passes. That is when the construction deposit is refunded back to you or whoever paid the deposit. It could be the applicant or the contractors. And then just one last thing, the keep in mind, there's on every project, there's 4 mandatory conditions that we are looking for on the final inspection. Those are 4 conditions that every property in Sunriver has to have. That is all your exterior lights shielded. You have a trash enclosure with a pathway from the driveway to the trash enclosure. You have a spark arrestor on your fireplace flue if you have a wood fireplace or stove. And your house number is under a light source on the house or at the lane, and is a contrasting color. And that's about all I have. I'll take questions at the end and try and help Mark and Kurt out if they need me to help them.
Okay. So you guys are gonna.
I'm gonna head over there right now.
Okay. While
Thanks,
Marty
Jason.
is switching positions, he's given you a pretty good idea of the overview of, how his office works. I'm going to touch on the design manual itself, and then Kurt will talk in detail about how the design committee actually works. And after that, we've got some questions that have been submitted that we will tackle, and then any questions that come in from the people who are online. So if we could get the design manual graphic. So the title page. Okay,
Let me share.
that's perfect.
Well, I have to share the screen so they can see it.
Okay. Great. Okay, the design manual is really the sort of the foundation for everything that the design committee decides on. It's, if you will, it's our Bible. It's what we go to whenever there's a question about a submission or any sort of request to the design committee for approval. It's basically an organized section or organized collection of guidelines and requirements that governs the physical layout and development of Sunriver. And the idea is that by having this all written down, that enhances consistency, and it means that we've got a group of regulations that we can refer to in a consistent standpoint, so that we're being fair to everybody in how we administer the design manual. You can't really be consistent if you don't have things written down to follow. The manual became effective in 1994, which means, oh, thank you, which means it's, I think, 26 years old. Now, Sunriver is over 50 years. So there are a number of projects, a number of houses that you'll see around that predate the manual. That so if you have a question about why a particular house actually got approved, it's quite possible that it was built before the manual became effective. But even though the manual has been around for over 25 years, it isn't a static document. We make changes to it periodically based on conditions in the community, based on changes in materials that are available. For example, in Sunriver originally, wood shingles were required as roofing material. Now they are prohibited. The reason is that over the last 50 years, our concern about fire hazard has increased dramatically. Synthetic materials such as Trex didn't exist maybe 25 years ago. We have to accommodate because they cannot be painted, so they have to be treated a little bit differently in terms of design. But we didn't want to just say, no, you can't use these materials. So we revised the manual slightly to address those. Recently, we dealt with wood piles and wood stacking. Due to all the ladder fuel reduction over the last, I don't know, 5 years or so, 4 years, there's a lot of lumber available, a lot of logs available for collection, and people have been amazingly creative in how they have stacked those logs. We began to realize a couple years ago that the use of logs as fencing and as property markers really conflicted with some of the fundamental principles of the design manual. So we revised the manual slightly to make it a little bit more specific as to how you can stack your logs. Now, so constantly we're looking at the manual to refine it. Just so you know, given that the manual is over 25 years, we are just beginning a process to completely renovate the manual. And this is, I believe it's going to be pretty much a ground up rebuild. That's going to take quite a while to do, but it's underway, and you probably will be hearing about that in the future. Okay. How do you get the manual? This is one of the big freebies that SROA offers. You can go to the SROA website, go to the Documents and Forms tab, and then under that you will find the design manual. And you can download it as a PDF file. The nice thing about that is that that file is searchable. So you don't have to read the whole manual in order to find out what it has to say about fences. You can just go to the search field, type in fences, and you'll go to every instance of fencing. So that is a huge resource, and we very much recommend that people take a look at the manual before they submit their projects. Okay, so what the manual covers is any changes to the architecture. You're adding an addition, a hot tub, even if you're adding a new window or taking out a window. It covers painting and repainting. It also covers landscaping, adding or removing shrubs or lawn, adding irrigation. It also addresses the natural environment. So if you want to cut down the tree or plant a tree, the manual guidance for that is in the manual. And so basically anything visible, as Marty was saying, on the outside of the house, and occasionally, under special circumstances, things inside the house, which we'll touch on a little bit later. Okay, what the manual does not cover are building codes. That's Deschutes County. We have no responsibility for whether whether the beam sizing over your porch is properly sized. That is not our issue. We're also not, the manual also doesn't address performance issues. For example, a roof design that would encourage ice dams. We know that that's a big problem here in Sunriver, but that is not within the design manual for us to address. That is between you, your builder, and your designer. So we won't typically mention anything about ice dam possibilities, even if we happen to notice it. And then, as I said, that we typically don't address interior changes, but there are some exceptions that we'll touch on a little bit later. Okay, within the manual, there are basically mandatory provisions and discretionary provisions. The mandatory provisions are basically, ones that don't allow the committee any room for any wiggle room, basically. For example, the lot coverage maximum is 35%. The committee cannot allow an applicant to do 37% if we felt it was necessary. We're restricted to the 35. Side setback encroachments. You cannot build into the side setbacks. And we'll talk about setbacks a little later in terms of defining them. But there are, we're just not allowed to enable an applicant to build into those setbacks. And as Marty mentioned, the lighting, lighting has to be shining down. It can't shine up into an eave. You can't use landscaping lighting to showcase a tree. These are all examples of mandatory restrictions. We cannot, we cannot overrule. The discretionary portion of the manual is a little bit trickier, and it's difficult oftentimes for the committee to address. These are issues that are maybe not specifically identified in the manual. For example, the manual says that there shall not be excessive contrast between paint colors. Well, matter of excessive contrast, Marty might have an opinion, Kurt might have a little bit different opinion. It's a little bit tough to pin down. So the committee has to make its judgment based on some fundamental premises in the manual that are explained in section number 2. Another example of a discretionary item is the height of a screen wall or a hot tub wall. We generally, the manual says 5 feet minimum, but we have some discretion for requiring it to be higher if there's an issue of privacy with the neighbor or, the actual privacy at the hot tub. We have discretion on other types of screen walls called privacy walls. Generally, the manual discourages them. But if we have a house that is on a corner and maybe one side is Abbott Drive and the applicant wants a little bit more privacy for his deck, we can allow that. We won't automatically allow that, but we can allow it based on the particular need for privacy at that site. So those are the 2 types of provisions, mandatory and discretionary.
Mark,
Yeah.
can I, leave that up there? Or?
Yeah,
Okay.
you can, leave it up there. I got one more coming, or you can take it off if, everybody can see, right?
Yeah.
Okay, leave it on there for a minute.
Okay.
See where we go. Okay, so the manual has 30 sections spread over 38 pages, and then there are a bunch of appendices. You don't have to read the whole thing. There are 7 sections that we have found are actually the most critical. And if you read those 7 sections before you deal with a project or submit a project, you're going to be way ahead of the process. So I'm not going to touch on all 30 sections. I'm just going to touch on the 7 that are we think are critical. Section number 2, and we could put up the table of contents on this. There we go. Okay, this is the table of contents of the design manual, and I've highlighted the items that are really important to know. Number 2, or section 2, general guidelines is actually very fundamental. It provides the guidelines for assessing site, house proportion, colors, architectural design. That's where you'll find the lot coverage details. If you want to really understand what the manual is aimed at, read section 2 and it'll give you all the basics. This is the section that the design committee oftentimes refers to when we come across an application that is asking for something that's a little unusual, that isn't specifically addressed in the manual. So general guidelines is really key to what we do. Section 4, the application procedures. This is where you will find out what to do and how to do it and when to do it in regard to moving your project through the guidelines. This section contains information about preliminary approvals and denials, the deadlines for submission of plans, and Marty will tell you that is if you pay attention to the submission deadlines, you will save yourself a lot of aggravation. Section 4 also has general requirements for the plans. They need to be accurate. They need to be to scale. We can't assess a project if we're looking at an inaccurate set of plans. Section 4 also contains the issues of, talks about staking and stringing, and we've got a couple of photos that show what the issues are there. And this has been a real problem for us in recent years, particularly last year, I guess. Maybe pandemic had something to do with it. But, okay, so the manual requires the property lines to be staked and strung. In other words, a wood stake goes in the corner, each corner of the lot, and yeah, that one will be good. And an orange string, and I hope you can see it, is strung between the stakes. Now, this is a project we saw not too long ago. The project that was being proposed is actually a hot tub on the left over there. Everything to the right is off that property owner's property. Without staking and stringing, we wouldn't have known that. And then there's another one. I'll show you a couple more. There's one. There you go. Either one. Yeah. Here's another example. This is a different property. Are they able to? There you go. This is a different property. The project that was being proposed is to the left and well away from the property lines. But once the property line was strung, we noticed that the owner had installed a retaining wall of some sort, and basically across his property line. And this is the kind of thing that we would require to be corrected if we're going to approve the project that was originally submitted. So section 4 is very important in terms of procedures. One other thing that happened recently, we had a new house proposed, and they had located 3 of the property corners with stakes. But the 4th property corner, they calculated. In other words, they could not find the property pin, which is slightly buried below ground. So they calculated the position. Well, they staked and strung everything, but the manual says that if you cannot find the property pin, you have to hire a surveyor to either locate it or install a new one. So in this case, because we didn't have an accurate view of the property, we had to defer this project for a later meeting, which meant that essentially it would be at least a month before we could actually take up the application. Okay, section 12. Go back to the table of contents. This is where you'll find details about roofs and roofing materials, the types of siding that are generally recommended, the allowable materials for walkways. For example, we prefer things to be paved, but we allow gravel walkways, but only if they are contained, meaning they're installed in a way that doesn't allow gravel to spread all over the yard. There is a product list for roofing materials that you can get from community development. It basically gives you all the details of approved manufacturers and their approved products for use in Sunriver. So if you have that list, you won't make any mistakes about specifying a roof that would not be approved. Section 12 also covers the parking requirements for driveways, and it addresses the issue of sleeping spaces and bedrooms as they relate to parking. This can be a very tricky kind of an issue when you're proposing a major remodel. So it's important to take a look at what is required there. By the way, a sleeping space is a good example of a discretionary decision by the committee. There are no specifics in the manual that tell us what a sleeping space is defined as. So we make judgments based on our understanding of the manual. Section 13, this is where you'll find all the information about setbacks. Basically, setbacks define the buildable area on a lot. And as I mentioned before, only very little can extend into the setback. So you got to know what those dimensions are before you plan your project. This is also where you'll find what is allowed to slip into the setbacks and which isn't. Okay. Section 17, about hot tubs, privacy screens, and fencing. This is where you'll find the details of how to screen a hot tub, the materials to use for the screen fence, the height, all the details. Section 19, exterior colors. This is where you'll find the statement that we are to avoid excessive contrast in colors. And that's, again, it's a discretionary issue that is sometimes troubling to administer. Colors, according to the section, colors are supposed to be compatible with the environment. Well, again, that's, what constitutes compatible? A number of years ago, I understand that we had an argument with an applicant who said, well, look, the sky is blue. That's a natural thing. How come I can't have a blue house? I won't go into the particulars of that, but the guy didn't get a blue house. So this section will also talk about the house body color and what parts of the structure are supposed to be painted the house body color. It won't say exactly what color you are allowed to use, but it will address the contrast and issues like that. It'll also address whether it is okay to put a clear finish on logs or timbers or any other woodwork. Okay, the last item is the appendix. And it will, I didn't get it on that list, but it follows section 30. And this is another one that's oftentimes overlooked. It is, in this section, you'll find the checklist for plan review, which tells you what your plans need to look like, what they should include, what the site plan should have, what the floor plan should have, what details should be on the elevations. So it basically addresses all the exterior features. You'll also find in the appendix a landscaping list that addresses the flowers, shrubs, trees, grasses that are recommended, as well as, yeah, there you go, fantastic. As well as items that are not recommended, like, that are discouraged, like planting juniper and bitterbrush. And the nice thing is there's a bigger list of recommended than not recommended. So that's a kind of a quick overview of the manual. You know, the more you work with the design manual's guidelines, the smoother your project will go. That's, you know, I can't stress that enough. Okay. I'm going to turn this over to Kurt, and he will talk about the design committee review.
Thanks, Mark. Who is the design committee? All of the committee members are owners, just like you, who are all volunteers and are appointed by the SROA Board of Directors. The committee is tasked with reviewing residential, commercial, and resort area projects to ensure compliance with all applicable documents. The primary document used is the design manual, which Mark just described in detail. We may also refer to Sunriver rules and regulations and the Sunriver Consolidated Plan, and occasionally sub-association rules. There are sub-associations within Sunriver that, for example, have restrictions on roofing materials that can be used. The committee meets two times each month, generally on the second and fourth Fridays. Number of projects on the agenda is based upon the submission of projects from you, the owners. Usually there are 3 to 10 projects for each meeting. Community development staff assigns 1 or more projects to each committee member. The committee member is responsible for preparing a motion for the assigned projects. Each member visits all of the project sites on the agenda to review existing conditions and the proposed plans. Often multiple site visits are required to complete a motion properly. We also consult with SROA staff members in preparing the motion. We follow Robert's Rules of Order during the meeting. SROA employs a consulting architect who also reviews the sites and plans. The consulting architect prepares a recommendation for each project. Staff also prepares comments for each project, but does not provide recommendations. The recommendations and comments are sent to each member. Based upon the site visit, a plan review, recommendations, and comments, the member assigned to the project prepares a motion to defer, deny, or approve a project. The motion also may include any conditions for approval. This motion may not agree with the consulting architect's recommendations. During the workshop, which is the first portion of the meeting, the committee member presents a proposed motion. The consulting architect and other members discuss the proposed motion based upon their reviews. Sometimes these comments are incorporated into the proposed motion and sometimes not, depending on the committee discussion. It's a very fluid situation during that part of the meeting. Often, discussion results in a significant change to a proposed motion, sometimes even changing a planned approval into a denial. During the formal meeting, the projects are discussed in the order that they appear on the agenda. Basic information regarding the project, including any history, is presented by staff. The member who has been assigned to the project presents a motion. Following that, the floor is open for comments from the audience. Based upon these comments, the committee may elect to revise the motion to reflect any additional information. The finalized motion is then voted on by the committee. Staff members do not participate in the vote. The outcome of the approved motion can be approval with conditions, denial, or deferral. Approval means the project is accepted as proposed. Approval with conditions means the project is accepted, but certain changes will be required, such as a change to a screen wall height. Approval with conditions normally will require additional submission from the applicant. A denial means the proposed project does not meet the requirements of the design manual, and significant changes will be required to bring it into compliance. A deferral usually means that needed information is missing. The reasons for the outcome are supplied with the decision. Marty touched on this, but the applicant may request a review of a decision that is unacceptable. The review is scheduled for the next available meeting and placed on the agenda. At the meeting, the applicant then explains why the decision was unacceptable and provides any additional explanation. The committee then discusses the issue. A member is selected to prepare a motion based upon that discussion, and the motion is voted on by the committee. If the result of this review is not acceptable, the applicant may request a hearing before an appeals board. If a committee decision is not acceptable to an owner other than the applicant, the owner may request a hearing before the appeals board. The appeals board makeup and actions are defined in section 8.02 of the design manual, and their decision is final. That's all I've got. Mark?
Pretty good. I had a note here to ask. Have we talked about what a deferral, what grounds there are for deferral?
Normally, what a deferral means is that the information that's presented to the committee is incomplete, so we can't make a proper decision based upon that. Deferral generally means there's a question as to what the intent is, as opposed to an approval or a denial, which means we more or less understand what the intent is, but we want to make some changes to that. A deferral usually means we don't know.
Okay. Right. We have, there are a few questions that were submitted in advance, and we're going to try and tackle those right now, and then we'll, as I understand, open it up to any other questions. All right. So I've got one that relates to the manual. The question was, is the square footage of structures just the stated percentage in the design manual? Okay, that's an interesting question because there's really two aspects to this. Number one, there is nothing in the manual that restricts total square footage. So the restriction is on the lot coverage. In other words, the amount of the building that is actually covering the ground. So that 35% maximum includes all areas above grade level and within any screened enclosure. But it's not a pure square footage issue. That would, to get a little bit more information on that, you would consult section 2 of the manual. Another question I have is there a limit to the amount of paved parking that you can add? This would fall under section 12 of the design manual. And you know, in section 12.09.4, you'll find the minimum requirements for off-street parking. But decisions on the amount of driveway that are being proposed or paved parking are also based on, you know, what the committee feels the visual appearance is, whether there's an excessive amount of hardscaping, or whether there's some major vegetation losses. And also relevant to that question would be information would be found in section 13.06.2 that says that no driveways, turnarounds, or parking areas are permitted in the side setback. So that would tend to limit the spread of the driveway. So that's what a couple that I saw.
Well,
Yeah.
there's a question that was on the chat from Monica Mack in regards to your first question you addressed.
Okay.
So she's asking, so 35% does not include decks?
That's a good question. It does and doesn't. I guess is the right answer. If the deck is grade level, in other words, below 12 inches above grade, it does not get included in the lot coverage calculation. Same would go for a patio, you know, masonry patio that's at grade level. If the deck is above 12 inches in height from grade, then yes, it is included in the lot coverage calculation.
Okay, there were a couple of other questions that came in earlier. First one was, can you get some guidance on planned additions such as a bedroom prior to putting it together so it would be a quicker process with less mistakes? First of all, I would recommend that you download the manual from the SRO website, and through the searchable PDF, look for anything that mentions bedrooms. In addition to that, Marty is available to discuss a project and make recommendations based upon what he knows that the design committee is going to look for, as well as specific requirements in the manual. Another question is, can a single car garage be added to the house on the opposite side of the house from an existing single car garage? There is nothing in the manual that strictly prohibits that. However, what that means, generally speaking, is that the driveway is going to have to extend from the existing driveway across the front of the house to the additional garage. And generally, we have discouraged that. Part of the aesthetics of Sunriver means that it looks like a cohesive project. If you have a driveway cutting across in front of your house, it generally means that it looks like the house doesn't exist on the property. In addition, there may be hardscape requirements that because of the size of the driveway, we feel there's too much hardscape. The manual does say that for new houses, you have to include a double garage, but it doesn't talk about existing houses and additions of garage. So that's one of the things that Mark expressed as a discretionary thing for the committee. And we would talk about that, but generally, I think that probably would not be approved. But it depends upon the specifics of the project.
We got one more question that was submitted in advance. The question is, what are the guidelines for setbacks and what can go into setbacks? Well, there are front setbacks, rear setbacks, and side setbacks. And they all have their requirements, but most often we find the problems cropping up with the side setbacks. So we'll address those. The setback for a single family, or I mean a single story house is 5 feet from the property line. And for a 2-story house, it's 7.5 feet. These setbacks, the side setbacks, are designed to keep a minimum distance between one house and another house. Now, the manual in section 13, basically 13.06 and portions 1, 2, and 3. So there's a good discussion about this. Generally, though, no building improvements above grade level are allowed to encroach into the setback. So building improvement, that's obviously the house, but it also means any gables that stick out from the house, the eaves that come off from the roof. Same goes for trash enclosures or AC enclosures. Nothing above grade level, which is defined as, below 12 inches, can encroach into the side setbacks. Landscaping, however, can go up to the property line in most circumstances. Although if you're going to plant a big tree right on the property line, you would probably be discouraged from that, because the limbs of that tree as it grows would pass over the property line onto your neighbor's property, which we discourage. Grade level paths can be in the side setback, but as I said before, the driveway and parking areas are prohibited from being in the side setback. And the rear setback, which is a variable number, the committee has some discretion for allowing patios into the rear setback, but that's again, one of the judgment calls. I think that's all I have for submitted questions.
We've got some on chat. Then I'll address the ones on chat first, and then we can, I see one person has their hand up, we can unmute them and let them ask the question. But first one is from Barbara Brocker. Her question is, cul-de-sacs which have smaller homes on them sometimes are helpless when a party house is proposed. What rules are in place to reduce this possibility, which can be disruptive to a quiet cul-de-sac experience? I'll let one of you answer that.
So would you, I didn't quite get the whole question.
So she's just asking what rules are in place to reduce the possibility of a party house in a small cul-de-sac that could disrupt the quiet
Gotcha.
cul-de-sac area.
In the design manual, nothing. That is what we call an enforcement issue. It's up to the Sunriver Police Department, or I don't know whether, Marty, you would ever have involvement with that, but typically the police department. Think of this, it's doesn't relate to the architecture of the building or the landscaping, so it does not fall under the purview of the design manual. And if the design manual doesn't cover it, then the committee can't address it.
Also, we can't project how a particular property is going to be used. Just because it's a large house doesn't mean it's a party house. And just because it's a small house doesn't mean it's not going to be a party house. We don't know. And that's not something that we can take into account, generally speaking.
I'll just add to that, the committee's really bound to adhere to the rules of the manual. So, I mean, if it falls within the 35%, if it falls within the 60-40, if it's not encroaching on setbacks, the architecture fits, all the things they look at in the manual, they can't deny something as long as it's fitting within the intent of all the rules. So the committee can't really say, well, this is going to be a party house, so we deny it. That's just not in their purview. So
Generally also, the design manual is based upon aesthetics. How Sunriver looks, not how it acts.
Right.
And I think it's a major distinction for our review process is, does it look nice? If not, we'll say no. If it looks nice and follows the manual, we probably generally have to say yes. But if we think it's gonna be a party house, we can't do anything about it.
And not to make this one go too long, but just as far as an enforcement piece, I get phone calls on these types of situations. But for parking and things like that, the only way I can address a parking issue is if it's in conjunction with a construction project on that property. Contractors or what have you. Really, it's a noise complaint to the police department. It's a parking issue for the police department. And then where I can get involved when it's not a construction is if they've kind of created an extra driveway, let's say, or added onto their driveway without approval, then I can address that part of it. But unfortunately, it's really kind of a police department matter at that point. All right, so the next question is, and I can answer this probably better, but in general, how responsible are the registered contractors? Sorry, this comes from Chris. In general, how responsible are the registered contractors intended to be in the creation of a design that fully complies with the design rules? So Chris, if you guys are okay, I'll answer that one.
Oh, yeah.
That one is, that it's really, unfortunately, it's between the homeowner and the contractor, whatever they have in their contract. We as staff or as a owners association do not and cannot get involved in any legal matter. If a contractor, designs something and it doesn't get approved or for whatever reason, that's why you have the ability to come back to the design committee multiple times if needed. But as far as the responsibility, that's between the applicant and the contractor. We don't have anything in the design rules or the rules and regs that really addresses that concern. So hopefully that answers your question.
Although there is a requirement for contractors to be registered
Oh, correct.
with SROA.
Correct, good point.
And the process there is pretty straightforward, but I believe there is also a test, a brief test that's required that just kind of touches on, basically it's trying to find out whether the contractor read the manual. So there are a few questions about, pretty straightforward questions in there. It's not like a bunch of trick questions. But once the contractor is registered with SROA, they are basically on the list that you can use. But the list does not mean that they are necessarily good contractors or the best contractor. It just means that they have registered and demonstrated that they understand something about the design manual.
Okay. The next question we have from Debbie Whiteman. Where can we find the trees and sizes that must not be cut down? And what is a vacant lot? What if a vacant lot has several small ponderosas in the middle of the lot, which would limit building a house?
Well, that's a good question. We have I can think of a particular project that had not a small ponderosa or group of small ponderosas, but a big Jose ponderosa, gigantic, beautiful tree, smack dab in the middle of the lot. There was no way that anybody was going to be able to build on that lot without taking out that tree. And so that was part of their application for a new house. And the design committee struggled over that, but ultimately had to approve it because to force somebody to keep the tree would mean they couldn't build their house. And in the somewhere in the early part of the design manual, in the introduction, it talks about the right of people to develop their property. We rely on, I think, also Natural Resources Department for guidance on trees.
Also, generally speaking, ponderosas are the trees that you want to have saved in Sunriver. Lodgepole pines, not so much. But if you have a large ponderosa on your property, that doesn't mean that the property can't be built. It means that you maybe can take that into consideration with your design and keep the house away from a large ponderosa. Oftentimes, we as a committee would suggest a way to do something a little bit differently that will encourage a tree to be saved. And we also oftentimes say, yeah, you can do that, but we want a report from a certified arborist saying this is what we can do as an applicant to save a particular tree. So just because there's a tree there doesn't mean you can't build on that property.
Right, and then to find the sizes, so I believe it's section 12 under the construction guidelines. It speaks about, 4 inches in diameter or greater. It's also on the application for submittal that anything 4 inches in diameter and greater need to be on the plans. But other than that, if it's smaller than 4 inch, or if there's any other trees in question, we usually refer applicants to Natural Resources, or the committee will ask them, because Natural Resources has their own criteria for tree removal as well. And it can be tricky at times. There's certain cases where the committee has to approve or deny a tree removal, but there are other cases where Natural Resources will approve or deny removal of trees. So it can be tricky with trees, but those are kind of the basics on that. And then, let's see. Already answered. No. Okay. This is from Chris again. I know you have a listing of registered contractors, but do you maintain a list of completed projects identifying the type of project and the type of dwelling for a registered contractor? So I'll answer that one too. Chris, we do not, we maintain that information internally, but we don't put it out to the public because that is a personal information violation as far as we're concerned. So for example, if a contractor or a realtor wishes to see a set of plans from a property, we have to have the owner of the property's permission to release those plans to somebody. So we do maintain, not necessarily a list, but we do have plans of projects that were approved. Typically, we know which contractor was associated with that project, but we don't put it out for public view. It's kind of that owner's information to keep. So hopefully that answers that. Next one from Joel Eric. if the lot coverage is already over 35%, can you remodel if you do not increase lot coverage?
Good question. You want to have it?
Huh?
That's a tricky
You
one.
want to take it?
I'll see if I can take it. If it's over the 35%, it is non-conforming to the current design manual. And my guess is that we would not allow the project, but what you're asking is if you're not increasing it. No, we would probably say we would deny it because you're making a change to the property, and that triggers our ability as a design committee to make sure that everything that was not previously in conformance with the design manual is brought into conformance. There might be some, I don't know, for houses built before the design manual was instituted. Marty, is there any latitude there?
It's difficult for us to tell because typically houses that were built or projects that were done prior to the design manual typically don't have a lot coverage calculation with it or a percentage. So the only way we know that is if the applicant and or their designers, when they submit something, they're like, that's when they discover, oh, we're over the 35%. If I have projects or plans from, this 60s or 70s before the manual or before that rule in the manual, and it looks pretty much exactly the same as what they're submitting, I guess we could say, yes, it was approved, but again, it's very difficult to tell what it was back then. I would guess that the committee would more than likely require, they may, it's not that they won't allow a project or remodel to happen. It's just that it would have to be reduced down below that 35% for them to approve it.
Yeah.
So-
And it might be a matter of reducing the size of an above grade level deck.
Right.
To get it under the 35%. So there, depending on the project, there are various ways that kind of a problem can be addressed. That also brings up something that's kind of related, and that is we periodically get questions from applicants saying, look, all I wanted to do was add a deck in the back of my house. Very simple deck. And yet, in order to get approval from the design committee, you're asking me to fix a bunch of lights or remove lights that are in the front of the house. And these two things are not related. The issue is, again, that once we go out to a project, we're not just looking at what has been proposed, but we're looking at everything else. So if there is an encroachment on one side, or if there is an issue with lighting that is shining upwards, we will make those conditions of approval. In other words, in order to build your deck, you've got to fix these things that are addressed in the manual.
2.08, the section of the manual that covers that, basically says that in order to approve a project, we have to ensure that everything else on the site meets the current rules and regulations.
Next one, I answered through chat. Well, I'll just cover it real quick. Brian Traficante asked, are driveways included in lot coverage? I answered by chat, no, it is not included in lot coverage. And then he asked a follow-up, are pavers allowed within the side setback? As a walkway, yes, they can be. You want to
Yeah,
add anything
no,
to
that's
that?
perfect. It's not the material that is at issue, it's encroachment into the side setback. So if it's asphalt or pavers and it's a walkway, then it can go into the side setback. But if it's a paver driveway or asphalt driveway, it cannot.
And sometimes there are driveways that are edged with pavers, and that's part of the driveway, that's not part of a walkway.
Correct.
Good point.
Yeah, to be clear, the manual says walkways are really the only thing allowed in the side setback, whether that be pavers or asphalt.
Right.
Let's see. Oh, this is a good one. Debbie Whiteman asks another question. Are there any restrictions to allowing an owner to install underground large propane tanks?
An underground large propane tank,
It's probably more of a county issue than
yeah,
us.
I think something like that. It's not in the, there's nothing that addresses that in the design manual, but that might be a building code or possibly even Sunriver Fire Department.
Well, I remember not too long ago, there was a proposal to install a large propane tank, and that was allowed as long as it was properly screened.
Mhm.
So I think the issue maybe is an underground tank that we don't consider,
But the fact that it's above ground would
As-
then
as long as it's screened.
trigger this
Right.
screening requirement.
Right.
Yeah, propane tanks are pretty tricky. There would be a lot of possibly state and definitely county codes that would go along with that one. But also if it was approved by, building codes and that, anything, because you're gonna have a regulator and all that kind of stuff probably up against the house or something above ground, that would just need to be painted body color.
Right.
That I would,
But there's another issue that might crop up on this one, depending on what you're actually thinking about here. And if the tank is above grade, it would have to be screened, as
Mhm.
Kurt was saying. But we generally look for screened enclosures like that to be visually connected to the structure. So if the tank was way in the back of your property, in order to connect the screen wall to the structure, you'd have a long stretch of fence or something else where we probably would have a problem.
yep. All right, so question from Chris Besson. What types of things generally fall into the like for like category when it comes to window and door replacement, roofing, etc.?
Good
So-
question.
Essentially saying a repair and maintenance type of situation. So I can just real quick on that one, Chris. As long as you're not changing the color, the configuration or size, or the materials, they can be repair and maintenance. So if you're replacing a window, a tan window, a tan fiberglass window with a tan fiberglass window, that's repair and maintenance. But if you're changing it from a tan fiberglass to a almond vinyl, it needs to be reviewed, but that's administratively typically. And that goes for any of those. Roofing's a little bit different though, because what the manual speaks about, if it's 20% or more of the roof being replaced, it has to be reviewed and by the design committee. If that also helps us know that the year, it helps the owner know too of when it was last roofed. I can't think of anything else on roofing
Well,
other than the 20%.
Regarding shoot.
yeah, I
wood
was gonna
shingles.
say.
Yeah.
wood
Well,
shingles.
yeah,
If you're replacing more than 20% in total over any time of a shake roof, wood shake roof, that's not allowed. So if you've already done 17% and now you need to do another 10%, you can't use wood shakes.
Yeah, that would trigger, basically the idea there is ultimately Sunriver would like to get rid of all wood shake or shingle roofs because of the fire hazard.
All right. Brian Traficante has another one. And this is a easy one. Can lodgepoles in common areas be cut if too near a project? Excuse me. Brian, absolutely not. Owners, anything on common areas are not allowed to be cut or modified. There is a process if somebody wants to make a common area improvement, that has to go through a full committee review. And even then, that's a very tricky situation when you're talking about commons for a few different reasons. Common area, that is all Sunriver property owners, that is their area. So to go on and cut a tree off of commons, you're essentially taking something away from all property owners.
Yeah. Is there a process if that tree is a hazard, and maybe that's the way that's why he wants to get rid of
I
it?
was just going to get to that. Yeah. So if it is a concern, say you think it's a hazard, or you've even had an arborist out there and they look at it and say, yeah, I would think it needs to be cut down. You would contact Natural Resources. They would come out and assess that tree. And then if it does need to come down, SROA Natural Resources would actually have a contractor that they work with come out and remove that tree. So, homeowner, the other piece I was going to get to as far as homeowners or contractors going and cutting down trees on commons, you're talking about a liability issue as well. So if you were to go out there and cut that tree down and you get hurt, or you drop the tree on somebody's car or something like that, and it's not your property, that gets into a really messy situation. So, all right. Next one from Debbie Whiteman: to use for a large generator to run when power is out.
Well, that's related to the propane tank.
I think it is, right?
Yeah. Well, the use doesn't really matter, Debbie. What is important to us is whether, if the propane tank is above ground or underground, whether it meets the criteria of the manual. If it's underground, it probably will. But again, we can't say it's okay to put a propane tank underground because I don't know.
But this is talking about the generator.
Well, she's talking about, this is this follow-up to her propane tank question. So
I see.
using the propane tank to run the
To use
generator.
for a large generator. So I guess if the generator is outdoors, it would have to be screened, right?
Yep. And I can't imagine it would be indoors.
Yeah,
Well, and
it'd be unsafe.
there's other issues with that, with generators. In fact, we just had one a couple years ago. They put a generator in the house, but you have to keep in mind the decibel level. There is a section of the manual that speaks about decibel level on equipment. It's 60 decibels or less. So, just another thing to think about when you're going to install that kind of stuff. And these types of questions, I think if people just keep in mind, it's the aesthetics is what the committee is really looking at. It's not the building codes or the county codes or state codes. You can kind of think about it in a way that, if I was to install this, how would I make it look to meet the intent of the rules? I mean, it's got to look like it's always been there. It's got to match the house as far as the screening goes. It can't be more than 60 decibels for the generator piece of it. So it's just keep that in mind, is the aesthetics piece of the committee's purview.
And if the screen wall that's required is so large, because you may have to screen the tank and the generator and whatever other equipment, if it's too big, we probably wouldn't allow it.
I just got one more popped up from Brian Traficante. Does an 18-inch high seating wall partially around a paver patio cause the patio to be included in lot coverage?
Yes.
Yep,
Yes, it does.
it's above that 12 inches. So yeah, anything, a bench or anything else affixed to a patio or a deck that's below grade, if that thing that's affixed to it is above grade, it bumps it into the lot coverage calculations.
That the entire deck or patio,
Right.
right?
Right.
That's in the manual. I don't see any other questions right yet, so I guess we can wait a few more minutes and see if anybody else has any other questions.
I have a comment to make.
Yep.
If you are considering a project in the future, please attend a committee meeting to see how the process works. You don't have to be associated with the project, or you don't have to be a neighbor to the project to attend the meeting. You can just be an interested party that wants to know how this stuff works. And if you attend a meeting beforehand, I think you'll have a better idea.
It's a good point. They're all public meetings, so all we need for the Zoom meetings is at least 48 hours prior to the meeting. You contact us and let us know you would like to participate or like to at least listen in, and we can include you in that process. So it's very easy to do. Something I just had a thought and I lost it.
Whoops.
Oh, so I just want to make a comment real quick on, I kind of wanted to thank Scott and the Sunriver You for asking us to do this, because I think this is important for homeowners and contractors alike within Sunriver to, kind of learn the process prior to submitting a submittal. The educating people prior to these meetings and the process, going through the process, I think just really helps them through the process. It makes it a little bit quicker and easier for them. Also, myself and Ken, well, Ken just found out today, but we plan on in the near future putting some things in the Sunriver scene and on our website, just little educational pieces here and there, things we're kind of seeing at the time, hot topics that we're seeing from a compliance standpoint or from a design review standpoint, just to try and keep helping that education along prior to people submitting things. So one last question from Brian. Are black aluminum railing or gates allowed on decks or patios? I'll let you guys answer that one. This is a tricky one sometimes.
Yeah.
We have approved black railings. We have approved black gates. Generally, the gate has to match the railing system that it's attached to. I think the committee as a preference would prefer to have wood posts, top railing, bottom railing with aluminum balusters, the round aluminum balusters. And that mostly disappears against the house because the railing system, other than the balusters, is painted to match the house. One thing that we didn't catch on a particular railing system is the mounting process on that railing system. The railing is attached to the fascia below the deck. And that creates a contrast between the railing system and the fascia because the railing is all black. So we would generally not allow that at this point in time, which means it would be a surface mount system as opposed to a fascia mount system.
Yeah, railings have been a little bit of a problematic topic, because we understand that people like metal railings because they're easy to maintain. But there are metal railings systems that look pretty good proportionately, and there are some that look a little bit skimpy. And our consulting architect in the past has had some very definite opinions about which types of metal railings we should be approving. But there is not anything in the manual that specifically says you cannot have a fully metal railing.
And it's really what it looks like.
Yeah, it's the appearance, and this is maybe something that will get addressed when the manual is revised, because it keeps coming up. So, you know, the manual should address it in some fashion.
So, and to add to that, Brian, a lot of people, when they submit for railings like this, they're typically, depending on the scope, but typically an administrative review. A lot of people don't understand why we ask for an elevation drawing of the house with the railing drawn on it. But this is the reason why, because it can be so tricky to meet the intent of the rules for the committee to make a decision on. The elevation plans really help them see what it's going to look like when it's installed to the backdrop of the house. So the other thing I think the committee looks for, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, is, you say black, but if it's a very light gray colored house, you have light colored windows, a grayish roof. I mean, the committee is going to look at the color of it as well, not just the style of it. As far as, is it going to create a lot of contrast with the house itself?
Mhm.
So that's another thing to keep in mind. I mean, there are some railings in Sunriver where, they've been approved as a dark bronze or even a lighter bronze because of the color of the house. It blended better with it. So just some other things to keep in mind on that.
These are all good questions.
Mm-hmm. I don't see a whole lot of other questions. Monica says, thank you. It's been very informative. Sandra says, thanks very much. It's been a very helpful session. Oh, here's one more. And Joel says, thank you. So I'd like to thank everybody for attending as well. Like I said, that I think educating prior to is a very important. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to all of you.
I agree. I think the committee appreciates you sitting through this process.
Scott, will this presentation be available to the general public at a later date?
Yes. Yeah, I'd like to thank all of you very much for doing this and taking time out of all your busy days to be able to do this for everyone. I think we really appreciate it. So thank you very much for doing that. This has been recorded and it will be made available on the Sunriver You YouTube channel. Sunriver You YouTube. And we have a YouTube channel now, and we are trying to record most of our sessions that are applicable. And they will be put on that channel for anyone to view at any time they want. So this is one of those that will go on there.
Super.
Excellent.
Thank everyone for participating. I appreciate it. And we'll see you at the next class, I guess.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.